So now I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Tracy Gusher, partner on data analytics and AI at KPMG. And joining Tracy will be Maria Caval, Vice President of User Interface Technology at Oracle. We also have Maria Caval.
Traffic jam.
Oh, traffic jam. Carolina Barcenas and Rima Alamedin.
I'll do a quick introduction and I'll ask my fellow panelists to do the same. So I'm Tracy Gusher. I'm a principal at KPMG. I lead our artificial intelligence practice in the US. And I'll be talking today with this fantastic group of women working in this field. I'll let each one of them introduce themselves.
Fantastic. So wonderful to be here. My name is Maria Caval. I'm a Vice President of Development for UI Technologies at Oracle.
And my name is Carolina Barcenas. I'm a Senior Vice President for Visa Research at Visa.
Hi, everyone, and thanks to HITEC for having us here today, and it's great to be here. I'm Rima Al-Madin, and I lead NVIDIA's healthcare, life sciences, and manufacturing business. And we focus mostly on helping customers with their solve problems using AI.
Thank you all to each of you for joining me here today. The conversation that I'd like to lead is really around the landscape of artificial intelligence in the enterprise and some trends that we've been seeing in the enterprise as it relates to the use and adoption of AI. KPMG sponsored a research study earlier this year where we looked at what are enterprises doing with AI today and what does the future look like. And coming out of this research study, we found 8 key trends. Rapid shift from experimentation into production, the convergence of automation, AI, and low-code platforms together, the pure momentum of AI growing in the enterprise, new organizational capabilities as it relates to how AI will be brought to bear within the enterprise, internal governance and control aspects, what we refer to as AI in control, or avoiding what some of us joke is bots gone wild. And then the rise of as a service was another key trend wrapped up by how AI is actually resulting in competitive advantage versus just a nice to have. So what I'd like to do over the next 40 minutes or so is explore a few of these areas with our panelists and get their take on how they're viewing some of these trends in the market and some of their personal observations. So I thought we'd start with momentum. One of the things that we're seeing is the rapid shift from experimentation into full production, into really bringing it forward out of the lab. But with this being a driving force in organizations, we're also seeing that a lot of enterprises are still having a challenge in doing it. The need is there, the desire is there, the use cases are there, but there's still a lot of challenges. So Carolina, I wonder if we can start with you. In your role in research at Visa, what are you seeing in this space? Are you seeing that rapid movement forward?
Yeah, so let me elaborate a little bit on the Visa research. We do about 70% of the work that we do is AI. We also do other more fundamental work, right? But for the AI, it's all around prototyping, what I call product-driven research, right? So we want to build complex solutions and, to your point, be able to put them in the hands of the customers, banks, merchants, the cardholders. And some of the things that I would say we've learned or we experienced, right, in terms of how do you get to that fast momentum is the first one is you really have to experience AI, right? A lot of what we do is deep learning, and nobody gets exciting by looking at a model with numbers, right? So you really need to feel it. And that being said, those prototypes that you're building need to be really aligned to the architecture that is already in the company. There has to be a team of engineers that understand very well how this prototype will rapidly integrate into the main code, right? So I would say the first thing is don't just build a prototype. I mean, build a prototype with a very clear line of sight that this is going to be deployed in in your system, right? So when we do the prototypes, it's real data, it's the real thing, except it's not probably scalable and all the security bells and whistles, but it's almost ready to go. The second thing that I would mention is don't build it in isolation. Build it with some people that have the SME experience in terms of like, it could look really nice, especially for some of the researchers. They get really excited that they have this very powerful model, and then you give it to somebody and it's not useful, right? I mean, so build it thinking ahead that somebody needs to be adopting it. And the third one that I hear quite a bit is, well, we cannot deploy that. That's not something that we can do in our systems. So I would say that it's super important that you have engineers that are also innovating, not just the AI people, but also the engineers are innovating in the technology so that actually you are pushing the line as well on the production systems, on what adaptations you need to make so that those prototypes can see the light of day fast.
And Rima, what about your point of view on this? I mean, NVIDIA is in an interesting space here because by nature, some of the products and services that you offer are specifically for bringing, AI to scale.
Yeah. So Carolina, I so agree with you. So as we've seen, the early adopters of AI knew that they could solve complex problems with AI. So what they did is they architected the whole software stack. They hand-built custom models. They were great at experimentation, but they were not great at industrializing the whole AI workflow because that wasn't really their job. So what happened is now you have these researchers that are piecemealing all these different cool technologies. So what we've done at NVIDIA is we've actually said, no, we have to take an architectural approach. If you are going to be leading your business transformation using AI, there needs to be an end-to-end workflow for AI that's industrialized all the way from how do you groom your data set to how you prototype and manipulate your data to how you train at scale and then how you inference. So what we have is we have an AI reference architecture that shares with our customers how you bring compute, network, and storage together and how you use the tools that are necessary to do all this work. And that frees up your data scientists and your IT team from having to do that work of a system integrator. And instead, they can focus on doing the effective work that they need to be doing.
And beyond I'd like to double back on something Carolina said, because I think it's a very poignant point and something that I think we've been seeing a lot of is you have to bring AI to the user. And we've got an example where we were building intelligent forecasting models for a consumer products organization, and we were bringing AI into these forecasting models. But what they told us was the financial analysts aren't going to use the AI models. They need to use the insights from the models. Yeah. And the way to do that was integrating it with their Oracle EPM platform. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, Maria, if you can add your perspective on this, uniquely from a user perspective of how you take to production and actually make it useful.
Yeah, if I think about Oracle, like even 2 decades ago with Oracle Labs, and all the data science, artificial intelligence research was going on in the labs, not at all embedded into the product teams. Now at Oracle, the data scientists are embedded in each product team. We still have Oracle Labs doing very deep research and in partnership with product teams, but the product teams themselves have that knowledge in-house. Also, our product managers and designers, really going back to what you were saying, are very focused on the use cases. Like, how do we bring this to the end user in a way that feels natural, right? Like, we want it. There is very complex logic and science and so forth, computation happening behind the scenes, but in many cases, the end user doesn't even realize that. We just simply happen to recommend to them something they wanted or were planning to do anyway, bringing that to the forefront of the interface, really making their lives in our software so much more smooth.
Yeah. The human element of AI, I think, is really interesting because so often we talk about AI not being human, but the reality is that it's actually meant to be very human in terms of the way that it interacts with us and the way that we use it. it's not useful if we're not using it. I want to shift gears a little bit here and talk about a completely different trend, which is at 5 and 6, if you're following along on the board, which is governance and control. And the need for organizations to have control over their AI. And Maria, maybe we'll stay with you. What are you seeing in this area? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think it's interesting. You were talking about the user in terms of using the AI, but the user is also incredibly important. The engineer, the governance is also really important in terms of developing and implementing this AI. To your point of like the robots have taken over the world, really, it's very important to have humans that oversee what the AI is suggesting, what data is fed in, how that's starting to, come up with ideas, et cetera. So I think there's a huge human element that's critical, in particular for that whole governance side of it.
And Carolina, I'm sure you have a unique perspective on this, given your focus on research. What kinds of governance processes are you familiar with, or do you have oversight on, or are oversought by?
Yes. So it's a very complex topic, the one you're asking, right? Because I think it varies by domain. It also varies by the country, the part of the world you're in. We know, for example, Europe thrives very heavily on regulations, way ahead of the US when it comes to data privacy, data security, and now recently in AI. So they are actually working on something that I think they're expecting to release next year that is going to put a lot of regulations about AI. And we know it's a matter of time, right, when the rest of the world catches up. But it has multiple dimensions as well, right? We're talking about fairness, right, and the ethics of AI. And what we mean is, if you're using these automated models to make a decision, you better be sure that that decision is not impacting a particular person. And we all have heard about biases in the models, right? The models are just as good as the data that you use to build them. If the data is inherently biased, then that's what you'd have taught your models to do. And they are going to have a negative impact potentially on people's lives, right? So it's the bias, it's the fairness, and I would say the third thing that is important, which we've been doing for years now, the monitoring. But in the past, the solutions weren't as complex. You didn't release models so often. We didn't talk about self-learning models. I mean, things have changed so much, and they're so dynamic, and they're so in flux that monitoring needs to adapt to be able to capture all those fast paces, right? So it's a complex subject, which I feel, to be honest, the algorithm and the mathematics have advanced way faster than this particular area, and we must pay attention, right?
Yeah, I think your point on the regulation is imminent is a very important one. I mean, right now we're looking at things like the OECD's recommendations on responsible AI as maybe a guiding AI compass for all of us to look at and perhaps build our own processes around, but we're not regulated by it yet. But as you point out, it's only a matter of time, and I think just like we saw with GDPR in the data space, we're going to start to see that coming forward from Europe in legislation around AI as well. And maybe I'll double click on data here for a second. So one of the things that we saw underneath these trends was rapid movement to cloud and cloud enablement around AI use cases. But there's still some challenges with some organizations in taking some data to cloud for various different reasons. Rima, let's start with you. What are you seeing around this, and what kinds of challenges are organizations still seeing or overcoming?
Yeah, so if you can start out with cloud, that's great. And it gives you a head start. You build up your capabilities really fast, and you have the flexibility to grow and expand, and you have the elasticity to use the cloud. So that's great, but all sizes don't fit. All sizes don't fit all, and it doesn't work for everyone. And the way we look at it is, it's important to understand where your data lands, and if your data is born and is created in the cloud, then that's where you want to put your compute. But if your data lands and is created between the four walls of your data center, then if you're moving those data sets back, you're moving them to the cloud on a regular basis, you're going to hit data gravity, and it's not going to be efficient. So it's best to have a hybrid approach and to have the capabilities for a hybrid approach, because then you can go with what makes sense for this specific use case, and you could decide whether you want to deploy in the cloud or in your data center based on what's more effective and efficient.
Yeah, and maybe a flip view of this would be from you, Maria. Given Oracle Cloud and the presence of Oracle Cloud, I wonder what your thoughts are.
So Oracle is, we have 140,000 employees, and we ourselves have taken Oracle to the cloud. Right, and so when Oracle started out, the cloud didn't exist, and now we have successfully transitioned all of our internal processes to the cloud. And what's really interesting in that transformation is things that maybe initially we would have thought, oh, that one's not possible. Right, that application, for example, it's not going to be possible to transition it to the cloud. We've done so much customization, or we have so many specific kind of hooks or whatnot that we've built for Oracle. And what we found as we dug in is that in 98% of the cases, all that customization and specialized code and so forth that was written 20 plus years ago, in many cases is actually absolutely not needed, can be simplified significantly, and the benefits of going to the cloud are simply astronomical, right? The scale that we can get, and then the specialization that can happen by not every single team having to worry about sort of the on-premise.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of that in a lot of the clients that I work with, and I fully support the trend that says that there is this rapid movement towards cloud. But I'll tell you, one of the industries that I've seen a lot of hesitancy in this space, particularly when it relates to customer data, is financial services. So I wonder, Carolina, if you can give us some comments on this.
Sure. So obviously protecting the data is very important in every industry. As you just mentioned, right? In the car industry, there's actually a regulation called PCI, the payment card industry. Just like we have PII, we have PCI, and there's certain constraints that you have to meet to be able to handle credit card data, as you can imagine. And if you think about, right now we don't have products in Visa in the cloud, at least nothing running in production. In external cloud, I would say, because we have internal clouds, but not external clouds. And part of it is because security is probably the most important thing at Visa. And we hear it all the time, security, security, security. Because if you think about it, right, we are, that's what we sell. We sell your data is secure, we can process your credit card transactions. So there's been a very careful analysis of where we go. I can't really speak of, what our vision is, but whatever it is, we have to be absolutely sure that we don't end up with a breach or people getting into our data when it's in the cloud, right? So I would say that's like the most important consideration that we're making as it relates. Because people have said to me, well, you can get PCI compliance in the cloud. And I'm like, well, you also saw the news a few months ago, right? So you have to be very careful with people's credit card data.
Yeah. And I wonder, do any of you have a view on where other industries are going in this space? I think, financial services is one that, as I look at customer data and their reluctancy, I think there's some very clear regulations and some other concerns. And there, I think, are other industries that are moving faster or slower. Any thoughts on that?
Healthcare is one also where they're very careful, and it's exactly the same thing. You don't want to put customer data out in the cloud unless you're sure. So I personally think, the cloud makes sense for so many different things, but then some industries are going to move faster than slower. So having the capability to do both and then moving at your own pace is the way that makes sense.
I think that does make sense. So one of the other trends that we have here is that AI can shift the competitive landscape. And certainly as we've looked at the way that the customer journey is completely transformed in the last, even 5 years, if we look at the success of new business models that have come out of things like Netflix or Uber and Lyft, we're certainly seeing this, particularly in the technology companies in the tech space. But I wonder, what other observations do you have on innovations that are being driven from AI and that are potentially becoming competitive accelerators? Maybe Maria, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think like one area that has oftentimes been considered separate from AI is Internet of Things, but in many cases what we're seeing is AI is really embedding itself in all these products, right? So with Internet of Things, having sensors for things like, what are the driver's license plates that are coming into my parking garage? Having even like olfactory sensors, are there humans in this area? So AI is getting embedded in many of the competitive landscape, the competitive sort of technologies. It's no longer something that I consider as standalone, but instead we're seeing it, even in bots, which is an area that Oracle is investing heavily in. This is like a chat bot or a digital assistant. AI plays a really heavy load there, not only with natural language processing, so understanding what is the sentiment of this customer, what is it that they're asking for, what is it that they might ask for next. So historically, again, we might have considered chatbots or digital assistants kind of its own technology area, but now AI is really feeding into each of these.
That's great. Rima, Carolina, any additional insights on innovations you're seeing?
Well, what is interesting is that people are talking about AI as is like, this brand new thing. And let's face it, the term was coined in 1959, I think, right? So AI is, people's been talking about AI for a while, and people that came out and said we're building the perceptron was supposed to be like the human brain, and all these very futuristic looking. And we know that we had the winter of AI when we realized that maybe we couldn't do everything we wanted to do, right? But if you think about it, right, in the early 2000s, things have completely shifted. And I actually attribute that shift for a few things, and this is my very personal opinion, at the change. One is we have so much data, right? People talk about big data because the sensors, the phones, the social media, everything. Then we didn't know where to store all this data. So then come systems like, the Hadoop and the flat files and all that, and then the computing power, right? Those three things that really have triggered, and it is really the catalyst for what we're seeing. And what I'm trying to say is that I think it's here to stay. And we have now figured out technologically how to handle it. And we are now seeing it everywhere, because problems that we couldn't solve back in the 90s, now we can solve them, right? So it's just going to get more prevalent in our lives, because now I don't see another winter coming. The technology piece has caught up, and we're there. So now the other one is what you were asking me, right? Is are we ready, right? If a driverless car has an accident, who is it to blame? Have we really caught up with understanding? Now that we have the technology, do we have all the support systems around it that we need to make it successful?
So I agree with both of you. So the way I see it is almost every industry is being impacted with AI, even industries that are really old, like hundreds of years old industries, like oil and gas, for example. AI is impacting everything from how we find oil, to how we pull it out of the earth, to how do we actually deliver it to the pipe, to the pump, so people can leverage the oil. But a lot of other industries, like when I look at healthcare, we're using AI to detect diseases faster and to help the doctor diagnose diseases. Of course, self-driving cars, like both of you mentioned, are another big area. But in addition to all these vertical applications, I'm super excited about what's happening today with natural language understanding and conventional AI. And the reason I am is because it's the next frontier. And the way our CEO, Jensen Huang, says, he said that now we are at the ImageNet moment of natural language understanding. And what that means is, as you were saying, Carolina. What happened about 7 years ago is AI actually started booming, and it was basically because of this whole ImageNet moment where Alex Krasinski won the ImageNet competition, and everyone woke up and noticed, wow, this is so powerful. We can use deep learning for all these other different projects. We are here now with natural language understanding. We are actually training models with 8.3 billion parameters. And they used to take like weeks and months, and now we're doing it in less than an hour. And our customers are taking decades of customer interactions in their call centers, and they're training these models with these with their data. And when you think about the remarkable results they're going to have, it's really amazing to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I just commenting back on a few things that each of you said. So, Carolina, I don't think anyone would disagree with with your point of view on why AI is actually powerful today. The volume of data, ability to store data cheaply, and compute power. I mean, that, like you said, the algorithms and the types of things that are actually performing AI have been around for decades and decades. It's those things that are actually bringing it to life. I would challenge anybody to challenge you. Something you said, Maria, I think is a great question to kind of, a great area to kind of double click on here, which is, in listing the innovations, you talked about chatbots and you talked about virtual assistants, and what these are mediums for us to integrate with machines, right? It's bringing the offline, the online to the offline world. It's integrating, creating that bridge between the two. And I think it's imperative to understand that we're bridging, not replacing, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to go back to the human element of all of this. So one of the things that we've seen as enterprise demand is growing, that what is growing with it is the need for talent. And the immense drought that we're getting into right now. And there's a lot of organizations that are working on the democratization of AI to bring AI into the hands of the non-data scientist and the non-engineer. There's some really great things happening in that space. But right now, as most enterprises are starting to build artificial intelligence programs or starting to move out of the lab and into production, they have this massive talent need, and there's not a lot of resources out there. So I wonder, maybe Maria, again, we'll start with you. How are you attracting the talent? How are you keeping the talent? What are the challenges?
Yeah, and I think the talent that we need is in so many different domains. We talked a little bit about the use cases and how important it is when thinking about artificial intelligence for your products, really honing in on is this going to be beneficial to the user? And that's where you need product managers or designers, really that human element to think through what are we going to tackle first. The space of AI and what's possible is huge, and at least what we've found very effective is to build, to work in an agile fashion, to kind of define your most valuable feature first and kind of build that out. And so that requires one skill set. Certainly the technical skill set, right, of the computer scientists and data scientists. But that's where, one of your trend 7 is the rise of AI as a service is so powerful. Historically, the knowledge that you would need to put AI into your product space was so deep and so heavy that it was really complicated, right? And like I mentioned at Oracle, we had the Oracle Labs team, which was kind of like the team that knew how to do that. And it's no longer like that. Instead, with AI as a service, which basically means that there is a service, a cloud service, that takes care of a lot of the processing, storage, data ingest, common algorithms, all that is taken care of for you in an AI as a service. And so when you're adding data scientists to your team, it's a much thinner layer. Mm-hmm. That helps a lot in terms of talent. In terms of attracting talent, I think it's likely the same for all industries. It's really, we're solving really complicated problems, and people who enjoy that, who enjoy digging deep, working together, that I think is a skill set that will never go away. The need for that will never go away.
Yeah, I get the question all the time, what do you look for in a data scientist? And I say ability to solve problems, curiosity, a drive to understand what they don't, and oh yeah, they need to know how to program. People usually look at me and go, but the reality is that what we're driving towards is, and yes, the science and the technology and the programming is important, but the ability to problem solve and critically think through problems is one of those areas that is imperative across these. So Caroline and Rima, I'm gonna change this question a little bit for both of you. So talent is difficult to obtain, difficult to retain, and even more difficult is ensuring that we have diversity in that talent. So I think it's no secret to the audience here that we have an all-female panel. And I wonder, what are your thoughts on how do we encourage more women to get into STEM programs? How do we encourage more women to want to work in AI? Because finding 4 AI experts that are females working in larger enterprises today, wasn't the easiest task, right? So what are your thoughts on how do we empower women to work in these types of careers? How do we encourage them? How do we mentor them?
Do you want to go first? I go first. I think it starts at the beginning of the pipeline, right? And I can't remember my numbers very well, but I believe in the 80s, 30% of the computer scientists were females. And I think I saw the numbers for maybe 5 years ago, and it's 18%. The question is, why did it go down, right? When what we would have expected is to go up. And I believe that part of the reason, and there's been some studies done that show that's the case, is that when some of these females go into computer science, which is the main degree for all these data scientists, right? Not the only, but one of the main degrees from where we attract talent, it turns out that the type of projects that they are asked to solve are not things they can relate. So, build a video game, build something for, sports, whatever, and I don't want to generalize here, but some of the example projects that they have to work on, they just don't connect. So there's universities that have been doing some studies where they say, why don't we ask them to build instead maybe a system to bring food or relief to a certain region, right? Something that they get passionate about. I feel we lose a lot of females by feeling this is not what I want to do. What's the purpose, right? And they don't connect, and then they leave. So they have the brains, they have the skill set, they just don't see the passion for it. And I think this is a field where you have to be passionate to stick to it. So if we start early, right, where we are actually, and the reality is that because AI is everywhere, there's all sorts of problems now to be solved, right? We need female and male and all different races to be working on this. Then we need to start at that level, right, where we attract them. And
That's a great point. Great point.
I totally agree with you. I feel like just AI in general, like these data scientists that need to be working on very complex things, any data scientist, whether it's a woman or a man or a diverse person, or everyone wants to work on meaningful things. But what does meaning mean? And it means different things to different people. And if you have meaningful problems that you're trying to solve, you're going to attract the best minds that want to work on those problems. So I think it's important to know if you're specifically trying to attract a certain fraction of the population to figure out what kind of problems they're interested in.
How do you bring meaning? How do you bring purpose to what they might be interested in?
Exactly.
That's interesting.
Exactly.
Rian?
Yeah, I think really introducing the technology to children earlier. I'm really proud of Oracle. Just outside the door is the HITEC High School. So Oracle's the first company to put a public high school on our campus.
Wow.
And we do internships. I've had interns in my engineering team. They come for 2 weeks. We do various labs and workshops and so forth. Oracle employees doing that with the high school students. And I think certainly introducing the concepts early is helpful. And here in Silicon Valley, we're very fortunate that kids do have more opportunities to be introduced. At Oracle, we also there's a lot of grassroots efforts as well as the executive sponsorship, but Oracle Women's Leadership and other just grassroots organizations around supporting women and creating that network. I did my bachelor's and master's in computer science, and it was a little lonely, right? There weren't a lot of women around, but I think growing those networks, informal networks or formal networks, can be really helpful. I think there's a lot of data to show that being a single in a team is really difficult. That could be a single, you're the only college hire and everyone else is middle-aged. You're the only female, everyone else is male. Whatever it is, being an only. The chance of an only leaving a team is like 4 times greater than general retention issues. And so I think there's a lot we can do there. Again, just grassroots groups, getting together, events like this.
Yeah, meetups and things like Girls Who Code, or a lot of other organizations that are focused on it, I think, are making great strides in this area.
Yeah.
I do want to leave some time for our audience to ask the panel questions, but before I do, a rapid fire question, and anybody can jump in with whoever wants to start. So what is the most exciting thing for you about working in AI right now?
For me, it's how we're really changing people's lives. I mean, specifically, I focus on healthcare. And when I see the things that we will be able to do, that we're doing today, and the things that we will be able to do with AI, it just is remarkable. It fires me up and gets me excited.
That's pretty cool.
For me, my focus is on the user interface. And I think the ability for AI to, we focus a lot on accessibility at Oracle. And so people with various disabilities, be that sight issues, dexterity issues with a mouse, et cetera, I just think this space of AI has a tremendous potential to level the playing field there.
Yeah, that is an absolute fascinating area of development that's occurring today, and some really amazing things.
Yeah. This is going to be kind of geeky, but
that's okay.
Although deep learning is kind of like neural networks, it's kind of the next generation, right? The mathematics is just so impressive and so beautiful, and the type of models and the billions of parameters and optimizing it. It's just like the technology to build and solve problems, to build solutions that solve problems. It's just really exploded, and it's really one of those things that I don't think we expected 20 years ago. To see this huge ramp up and being part of it is really exciting.
Yeah. I can't argue with that. I remember being told at a young age, why do you want to do all this advanced math? You're never going to use it. Well, yes, I am.
Yes.
So we have a few minutes left. Maybe if we've got microphones and questions, I'd love to open up to the audience for any questions that they may have. I think we've got a hand over here. Maybe we can get a mic to her.
Hi, my name is Kelly Montero. I work with Microsoft in the digital workplace. This is a little bit more than AI. I think Maria mentioned the IoT and the evolution. In this space, I feel that the software is evolving and AI is evolving way faster than the hardware and the construction and all of how we can apply this rich AI to rich face recognition or a sensor that is going to give you the data that you're going to need. How are you guys seeing that AI and all the software evolution with how the hardware and construction and cars, how is it reaching to that level? And if you had any experiences in your areas?
I think we're seeing a democratization of that data collection. So historically, it might have been a closed system, right? You needed the brand X sensor with the brand X AI, with the brand X, like everything had to be a closed, homogeneous system. I think what we're seeing now, and in particular with the AI as a service, is the democratization of that. So you can feed data into these machine learning algorithms from a variety of sources. And so the hardware, no longer do you have to wait on one specific vendor. You can really, that field can grow and broaden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that statement, and I would just add that, I think that's one of the reasons that we're seeing so much momentum and interest and discussion around things like OpenShift and Anthos and these containerization types of techniques, because it allows you to have this maximum portability of AI into hybrid clouds or on-prem or et cetera. And I actually think that there's some really good momentum building there, and I think we're going to continue to see it.
So without naming a client or a company, if you're not allowed to, give us an example of where you've, Tracy, maybe for you and others, of where you've seen something cool being done that has kind of drastically changed algorithms through an algorithm or AI that you've helped clients with, or any of you. Just like real life example that, I'm a non-technologist, so I love hearing that sort of thing. It's like, wow, that was really cool.
Yeah, Rima, please go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to give an example.
I'm going to give you my favorite one after she does.
I'm going to give an example from healthcare, and that everyone can associate with. So I'm sure you've all been in MRI machines, right? So you know how you get into the MRI machine and it's all dark and it's claustrophobic and you hear this clicking noise and it takes a long time for you to be in the MRI machine. So actually one of our customers, what they've done is they've actually reduced the time from, let's say, an hour to a quarter of that, which is 1/4 of that time that you need to spend in the MRI machine. And the way they've done that is by just using AI to reconstruct the parts that you don't have to spend time taking like really detailed pictures in this MRI machine. So the advantages of that is, one, the patient spends less time in the MRI machine, they're happier, they're not as stressed. The hospital gets to make a ton more money because they can have four times the amount of people in that machine, and they can see more patients. So and it's more effective and efficient. So I mean, it's a more practical example, but you could see how it's helping us today be more effective in the hospital.
So my favorite example, which isn't necessarily maybe the one that has driven the most profit or cost savings for an organization, but I think it's pretty cool, is we helped a power and utilities company use video recognition over agriculture to determine where they should trim trees versus where they don't need to. So basically you fly drones over the area, and these drones capture pictures of trees and bushes and other things, and it captures where they are in proximity to power lines or telephone poles or the like. And essentially, the AI model generates back, these are the streets and the exact geopositions that you need to go and trim this branch because the next hailstorm, snowstorm, whatever, is going to take this branch down on this line and take out power. So you can predict where there's going to be potential outages based on this. And the model goes even further to not only predict this branch can come down on this line, and this branch can come down on this line, and you have to prioritize, trim this one, because this is going to take out power to 20,000 people, this is going to take out power to 500. And being able to strategically, then trim these branches and clear this based on that information. It's one of my favorites anyway. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I have an example. I can't remember the name of the company. It's actually founded by a female entrepreneur. And it's a nice example of transfer of technology, what I would call. So the original idea was to look at your face, and then based on that, it was for like shopping when you're buying things, right, and see how you feel about a certain product. And somebody thought, okay, that's great. Why don't we use it for kids that have autism? If we're spending all this time understanding people's emotions for when they're buying things, could we leverage it to help kids with autism? And I thought that was brilliant, right? Because it's the same technology with very different objectives. One will make money, the other one probably not as much. But it's a very good example of the power of this technology.
The one that I recently heard about is police force, of maximizing where to be, when to be. The police force that was being analyzed had basically the same number of police officers at night versus day versus location of the city, and we used AI to figure out based on historical data where should the cops be.
And you have to be very careful with that one.
Yeah.
Let me tell you why. Those applications require data, right, to be modeled. Unfortunately, because of our system, the data could be biased to certain races. So there's a lot of you have to look into it.
I was wondering if you can, you briefly touched base on this and it's related to what you just mentioned. Recently, I read an essay on how AI was being used to create assessment tools that were used by the criminal justice and determine the risks of a person to be guilty. And it was not the only factor to make this decision, but it was influenced the decision of the judges. And they found that this was biased towards some races. So I was wondering if you can touch base on this and what is the responsibility of the leaders developing AI into making sure that the AI is not abused in this fashion.
Yeah, so what you're mentioning is called bias. That's kind of the official term, right? Like biases in models. And that is part of what I was mentioning. There are regulations. Right now, you build the models, and I'm hoping that all the responsible companies are looking for bias and making sure they're not putting models out there that are biased. But I don't believe there's regulation yet. Like I was saying, I think it's a matter of time when you build a model and then regulators will check, and there's mathematical ways to check whether your data is biased or not. You can test it, right? And I think we're going to be, at that point, regulated to make sure everybody does it.
And adding on to that, so these two trends that we found in enterprises around governance and control are exactly around this, particularly on the control aspect, which is, are you as an enterprise putting in place the right kind of controls that are validating models, validating the level of bias that you're willing to have as a threshold in the model or none at all, and those types of questions so that organizations can point to a model that, or a system enabled by a model that they've built and feel good about what it's doing and how it's doing it. I mean, certainly in financial services is a place where bias is something that even the regulators are on top of right now. But it's going to extend into every industry, and organizations that aren't thinking about it now and putting in place these processes are going to be behind the curve when the legislation starts dropping.
I also think it's a reason why diversity in the workforce is so important. Yeah. People bring to the table their own life experiences. And so having a diverse team, when you're looking at the controls and you're looking for potential bias, we all will approach that with different angles. So.
And something Maria said I think is really important is that people talk about bias like it's intentional.
Yes.
It's not. I mean, well, it can be.
Yeah.
Sure, it can be. But by and large, when you're looking at the way that a lot of these models are created, that when you go and try to validate them and look for bias and you find the bias, it wasn't intentional. It's because we all have different experiences and we all approach things differently. And that's all the more reason why the diversity of the people building them is so important. So the clock is double blinking 0 at us, which I think means somebody's going to come and drag us off stage soon. Please help me thank our panelists here today. Thank you so much for being with us.